Hey there. Happy Tuesday. This is Douglas Ferguson, as usual, and today I'm with Michele Chambers from Breaking Through the Noise. Great to have you here today, Michele. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Douglas, great to see you. Thanks for having me on your live stream.
Absolutely. And it's fun to actually chat live here. We've been talking a lot since late last year when you called me up. It had been a while and informed me that you were moving to Austin, like Joe Rogan and all the others. It's like all the celebrities have to move here. But we've been talking a lot about you've been helping out with marketing here at Voltage Control, and a lot of the thinking and work that you were doing at Amazon around large events and just collaboration in general in the remote setting has been really top of mind for you. So it's been really fascinating conversations, and wanted to just bring this to the audience today and unpack some of it, and also get some audience participation. So I'm going to go ahead and just ask you all to just say hi, leave your name, and any questions you have. We'll have a few prompts along the way, but happy to entertain questions you might have. We're going to be talking about remote collaboration today. And so, Michele, I'll kick it over to you to just what's been top of mind for you as we've been kind of exploring this stuff together.
Yeah, so it's been great working with Voltage Control and the other startup that I'm working with that's early on. And what I find is that everybody is in this environment where everybody's remote first.
Hmm.
There's a lot of challenges, right, around how do you keep your team aligned, right? Because it's one thing when you can walk over, you can call an impromptu meeting, you can go to a whiteboard and chalk talk through something, but it's very, very different to keep a team aligned when you're very distributed and when there's no in-person communications. I was listening to a data science podcast this morning, and it was really interesting because this young data scientist, like he's in his early 30s, and he has a master's degree from Georgia Tech. He teaches at UNC Charlotte, and he was talking about in the past when he would teach part-time at UNC Charlotte, because he has a full-time job as well, he'd come out of the classes all energized, right? And because there was all this interaction in terms of like the human connectedness, right? And now he still loves teaching, but when he does the same courses online, he comes away just wiped out, right? He's just
Hmm.
exhausted, right? Because even though you have a face that you're looking at, it's not the same kind of body language cues. You don't know how to adjust in terms of, are you connecting with that person or not? Like, what do you need to do in terms of your style? And so if you take that and you amplify it to, you have a business strategy that you're trying to execute on, and you're trying to keep your team aligned, and there's no in-person real connection, it makes it really challenging to keep everybody aligned. So that's a lot of like what I've been thinking about lately. So do you find that a problem, like at Voltage Control or any of the clients that you're working with?
Yeah, all the stuff you just mentioned. I was just chatting live with my buddy Cam, and we were unpacking the recent study from Stanford that was talking about some of the actual, psychological reasons why, we're so fatigued from these Zoom meetings. And, most fascinating thing to me,
Tell me more. Tell me more.
yeah, the most fascinating thing to me was like when you're think about how close you are to your camera right now,
Yeah.
and imagine you were that close to someone in a meeting.
Oh no, you'd be in their
Yeah,
personal space.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So basically, we're in each other's personal spaces all day, every day.
Huh.
And so practicing standing and getting away from the camera a bit, giving some perspective, even turning off your camera from time to time, doing, even going for walks, because we're way more sedentary when we're doing meetings in a space, because we're kind of confined to the frame of the camera, right? We're not going to just like hang out over here for a little while or whatever. And being able to take the camera off, throw your AirPods in or whatever and go for a walk. There's some meetings where you don't need the visuals. Now, coming back to your point around the collaboration stuff, I feel like it comes back to our advice around prototypes, and no prototype, no meeting. And so if we can bring a prototype to a meeting that has something visual to react to, we do it all the time together, right? Like we will start the gestation of an idea, and we'll throw that in a Google Doc, and then we have that Google Doc to react to, and we tear that apart together while we're on the phone. And often you and I don't even have visuals. All we can see is that Google Doc, and it's that shared alignment point. We're like, it's our focal point that just helps us like laser in on what's important, and we get super aligned because we're not just kind of talking past each other. And so, whether it's Google Docs or Mural or Figma, any tool that we can use to create a prototype and focus and focus and focus. Plus, we have that asset to come back to when we've forgotten what we talked about.
Yeah, so that's actually reminds me, at Amazon, one of the things Amazon's famous for is these docs, right? And there's all different styles of docs, but that's exactly the power of many of the docs, which is you're not coming into a discussion with raw ideas, right? What you're doing is you're putting your ideas down on paper so that everybody can look at it and react to it, right? And then give and add to that. So it actually creates that alignment a lot faster, and it allows you to, it's really like a form of continuous improvement where you immediately, are getting feedback that's additive. It's not like argumentative most of the time. It's typically additive. There are times when things can be argumentative, right? But most of the time it's additive. And so you wind up with a lot more value getting created. And I was talking with a friend of mine over the weekend, and she's in the healthcare industry. And I was describing this to her, the whole process and kind of what a typical doc would look like. And she was like, oh, that sounds like, I think her acronym was SBIR. I could be wrong about it. It was SB something. And it's situation, background. I forget what the I stands for, but it is. So I've looked it up. I was unfamiliar with it, and it's in the healthcare industry. It's a one-page, what I would think of as like a doc, where you literally fill in the blanks on this document to create that collaboration really quickly as well. So I think we're starting to see more industries do that, right? And it takes a lot of, did you ever read any of De Bono's work, Edward De Bono?
With the six thinking hats?
Yeah. And how, you take out some of the emotion, like the red part, right, in his six thinking hat out of the discussion, because the doc helps you have white, which is the data, right? And it allows you to do the blue, and the blue, if I remember, was the blue sky thinking, right? Like, so creative thinking is also in there. So I find that that's really helpful. And like with some of my other clients, I'm introducing that because, especially in technology companies, you wind up with lots of ideas, and depending on the maturity of the individuals in the organization, I can sit down and write a doc and pretty much stream of consciousness, right? Because I have enough gray hair that I am looking at problems from many different vantage points as I'm thinking through it. But other people may be looking at it with a very one-dimensional view into a problem. And by sitting down and writing a doc, it's creating that habit of looking at a problem through multiple dimensions, right? Because you don't want to go into a discussion with people and everybody poking holes, right? So now you start to think about things through different dimensions.
That's a good point. I find when I'm writing and preparing, even if I'm thinking about things from multiple dimensions, some of them may not be as finessed. Some of the dimensions may be a little bit weaker. I might be glossing over stuff. So once I lay it out, then I realize, oh, wait a second. The other thing too is, I've been thinking about the difference between narrative and story a lot lately. And as I delved into that more, the thing that struck me was, well, narrative is how you structure the story and how you create connection to the story. And that's why narratives are so important, because if we're really intentional and careful about how we structure it and how we intentionally create connection, we structure it in a way that our audience will connect more. And if we're intentional about who our audiences are, we can create better narratives for our story. And so
what you just said is really key, which is, first of all, identifying your audience, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't connect if you haven't identified the audience. And I find that that's oftentimes, I go back and say, who is this intended for? And people are like, right. But if you think about that first before you start writing, then you know that you're trying to make you're conveying to the right audience. And the other thing is understanding what your point is. Like you're saying, what's the story? Like, where are you heading in the end, right? So that way you know how to fill everything in between in terms of that story.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, like, I've found that even if I've got everything figured out, the components all very clear, writing it out makes me realize, like, oh, I should talk about this first. And I should, it's that sequencing, it's that structure, the arc, that really makes it much more compelling and makes it much more understandable. It's like, wait, people are gonna have a much easier time with this if I introduce this piece first, because it helps lead into this other thing. And that may not be as clear if you just start like spewing in the meeting, like, these ideas, right? They might be coherent, but they may not be. The narrative might not be there.
The other thing it does is, I think it creates objectivity, right? So one of the things that I like to do is to write something and then come back to it, typically at least the next day, if not longer. And that way I'm looking at it with fresh eyes and saying, does this hang together, right? Does it tell the story? And also think about it from, all right, if I knew nothing about this subject, okay, so there's no try and erase all my biases and assumptions, right, which is hard. Can I understand this, right? And that's why when I write them now, like, it's like the purpose and then like the context, which is the background and situation, is so that way you give the reader enough information to understand your assumptions that you baked into the plan. So
that's right. And even if you don't realize that those are assumptions, that's one of the beautiful things about working with diverse teams. And, I wanted to come to our next prompt around generating ideas, and specifically with a distributed team, ideally that's a diverse team. We're bringing everyone together and trying to make sure that they're all included and that we listen and we hear them. And, these writing things down, creating prototypes allows people to see those assumptions, even if we don't even realize they're there, because we've baked our assumptions into this presentation. And once someone's looking at it and really seeing what we're thinking, then they can start to point out, like, wait a second, let's look at this right here and unpack this a little bit.
Yeah, years ago when I went to a sprint session that you had taken Jake Knape's book, The Sprint, and facilitated, I think, one of your early workshops around that. Mm-hmm. I came away from that so empowered, okay, around the value of a prototype, okay, because we can say a lot of words, we can draw up designs, but until you have something that looks close to the real thing, your brain just doesn't think through, right? Because we're not all chess players that are, 9 moves ahead, right? You're thinking like 2 or 3 moves, right? And so what the prototype allows you to do, and it could be a piece of paper that's prototyping a website, right? Which is like what we did in the workshop. But what it did was, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that button doesn't make sense. Or if I push that button, where am I really going to be going to, right? It made people just think through a different level. And I found that hugely valuable, because so often you see companies commit to an idea and put all this resource. And once you have sunk cost, people it's kind of like my M&A class in business school. Like, my net of my M&A class was, most acquisitions don't really make a lot of financial sense, okay? Like, early on, like, you do all this extensive analysis, like in terms of the economics, but what happens is the 2 executives or teams get emotionally committed to the idea, right, of of merging, right, or the acquisition. And the same thing kind of happens with a prototype, right? Like when you're going off and building something, even if you said it's a POC or an MVP, you get boxed in and limited by that, right? Where if it's a piece of paper, somehow that creates this catalyst for freedom in our minds, and we're like, rip up the paper, crumple up the paper, right, and get rid of it much more easily.
You know, Jake's one of my favorite summations of that point is the graph that Jake made that basically shows it's a willingness to change on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, and it says like the more time passes, the more your willingness to change, or you become more unwilling to change over time, and it just gets. That's right. And so the thing is these rapid prototypes, these quick prototypes mean we haven't built up that fondness, that adoration. And to use your M&A example, imagine if it's the first day you meet someone and you realize like there's some incompatibility in the two companies. You're not going to go through with that merger. But if you're realizing that stuff, like, you know, deep in the diligence, that it's a lot easier to make excuses. Well, we can deal with that in post.
That's exactly the words that are used. Exactly. Because I've been through 3 or 4 acquisitions now, and a lot of it is like, we'll handle that in the post merger, right, as part of our transition plan. And I'm like, oh, that's like, you know, disaster coming. So
yeah, it reminds me of my days in the recording studio where people would like flub a note or sing sing something wrong, and they're just like, oh, we'll just handle it in post, post production. And you know, the more times you say that, the more trouble you're getting into. So, you know, I wanted to come back to one thing, because we're going over a little bit, but I wanted to come back to one point, and then we'll close out. You mentioned, I looked it up, and I think you're talking about SBAR.
That's it.
And this really ties in with this question and this point that we had earlier, which was, I love these frameworks and structures to help people align on a process that gets them to the right thinking and drives to the right outcomes.
Yep.
You know, and this is one of the reasons why I think brainstorming on the surface is fine if you understand how to play by the rules and you have people that are experienced in playing by the rules. But often people aren't, and they just say, let's brainstorm, and then they get up at the wall, and you know, chaos ensues. And often people aren't reserving judgment and these kinds of things. So that's why I love these kinds of frameworks. And this one, you mentioned situation, background, assessment, and recommendations. And if you think about it, they really mapped it on this ladder of inference, or this maturity curve of kind of moving through these phases, right? And so if you can think about the journey that you want to take your participants on, and you can make up your own words, as long as we're kind of framing that so they think about things properly and they show up in ways that are productive. And here's a little secret that I think people need to think about more often is it's not about remotes. It's not about virtual. It's not about distributed. It's about first principles of behavioral dynamics. It's group behavior kind of trends and factors. And the thing is we were doing it all wrong in person, but it was okay because we were used to it. As soon as we moved virtual, it was all foreign and weird. And granted, it's harder, but it shined a big spotlight on all our inefficiencies, and it just exacerbated all of it. So I love these frameworks like SBAR, or another one that is very, very similar is what, so what, now what? We do observations around what happened. And then before we move on to synthesis of what that means, let's internalize it and integrate it. And then let's put an action plan together. So often people want to jump straight to the action plan. And if we take them through these like phases of thinking, then they can get to more deep thought, and they can get to better ideas. And so I got really excited when you mentioned that, because I was like, that's one I hadn't heard of, but it follows the same patterns of the things that work.
Yep. And how, in your experience, how many repetitions does it take with a team utilizing a new framework for them to really absorb or synthesize that, and for that to become part of their DNA as an organization, so that that's their natural techniques for for brainstorming, as an example, like these processes.
You bring up a good point, and it really depends on how dedicated folks are. Sustaining innovation is hard. Sustaining change is hard, and it takes dedication and commitment. That's why we love to end all our workshops with commitment. So they're making commitments to each other for what are they going to do in the next 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. And it's not a matter of, when you go to people that do body work and they say 6 visits and you'll be fixed, no matter what your ailment is, like they've got their protocol. And it's like, that's not how the world works, right? Like everyone's got different drivers for the dysfunction. And so, it's really going to depend on the makeup of the team, how dedicated they are, and really what the fundamental dysfunctions are. But I will say that if they take a consistent approach, that's what it's about. Because it's not about some destination that we say we got to get to like supreme collaboration. It's about this iterative kind of continuous improvement that those same techniques we use for our software products and thinking about our customers, let's point those inward to our employees and think about our employee experience and how we continuously improve that work, because collaboration and the way we come together and the way we work is the most important thing, the most important asset a business could have.
Right. People is where, as a business, where the biggest typical driver in terms of cost, right? And so for many businesses, not for all, but and it is where we get exponential returns, right? Where we have the potential, like a machine, when we automate things with machine, we put in X, we know we're going to get 2X out, right? But with a human, it's highly variable, right? So we put in X to a human and we could get X out, we could get 2X, but we can also have the chance of getting 10 and 100X output, right? But we have to have the right mechanisms in place in order to provide the support and the processes to allow that person to get exponential output out there. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So I'm going to, I know we've gone over here, so I just want to close this out and just give some big props to an upcoming conference here in Austin that I'm a huge fan of. And we're actually a sponsor this year, Culturati Summit. It is a summit that covers a lot of the things we were talking about today, specifically the higher level ideas of investing in your people and how to create good culture. And maybe not so much of the technical pieces of how to run great ideation sessions and whatnot, but definitely really amazing place to learn from folks like Adriana Huffington around how to create great culture and how to support your people. So highly recommend it. I'm really excited because as a sponsor this year, we're going to be hosting reflection ideation sessions on how all the sponsors for the summit can take away learnings and implement best practices that they learned from the conference. So your question is very timely about how people can put this stuff into action, because those are the workshops we're going to be running for all the sponsors post summit.
Very cool. Well, I'm looking forward to the Culturati Summit this year. It will be very interesting I've never been to it, so it'll be something fun and exciting and new to learn a lot.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, Michele, it's been a pleasure having you today, and I look forward to having you again.
All right. Thanks, Douglas.